Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I have a pretty cool blade. This is the Zero Tolerance 0300. Now this is the Blackwash version, and this is the one I really liked. I'll admit I was on the fence a little bit about this knife until I saw the Blackwash and really liked it. And I really like that finish overall. There's a number of Kershaws that I kind of want in that finish, even though I wasn't crazy about them before that. Give you a little bit of background on this knife. It was, of course, sort of the flagship knife when Zero Tolerance launched as a high-end effort on the part of Kershaw Knives. And at that time, it was a collaboration between Kershaw, Ken Onion, and Strider Knives. Now, those influences are pretty evident, Ken Onion and Mick Strider, in this blade. And it's a great blade. Now, sadly, those guys have moved on. The association is over. Kind of wish it wasn't, because this is an awesome knife. I'd like to see more like it. Anyway, let's kind of move on from history and talk about this knife as a very, very cool folding knife. The thing I want to point out, if you're only going to watch a few minutes to sort of say, do I want to buy this or not? It weighs 8 ounces, so it's very, very heavy. But if you can get past the weight, everything else about this knife is a real win. I really, really like this blade. And so let's start with size and weight, since that's what we always talk about. And that's one of the things that is going to stand out about this blade. This knife is 8.1 ounces, which is very heavy. Now, for that 8 ounces, you're getting a fairly big knife, but not huge, okay? This knife has a 3 5/8 inch blade measured from the highest point of the handle. If you measure from the pivot, which is like down here where my finger is, you do get 3 3/4, and that's why you'll see that listed on a number of websites, because they measure from the pivot and you can see how the handle slopes down. So they're giving you a longer measurement than the actual highest point on the handle, which is what I think legally you're supposed to measure from. Anyway, that's fine. But 3 5/8 or 3 3/4, depending on where you measure from, 5-inch handle, and so 5 inches when it's closed, that dimension there. This is 1 7/8 inches, so it's a big, thick knife, and you've got a good 1/2 inch, even a little more than 1/2 inch in width. So this is a big knife. It's going to take up a lot of pocket space, but for that size and for that weight, you are getting a very, very hard use, very, very tough blade, okay? And not only is it very, very tough and going to serve you well in difficult situations, but it actually serves really well for EDC tasks as well. So let's start off with the blade, since that's what we always do, and kind of work our way down in this direction. The blade is S30V blade steel. You got a nice big thick piece of it here. And this is a sort of a modified drop point with a recurve. You have a high flat grind. Now, because of the width here, you can see this is a wide blade. Let's come in just a little bit, if the camera will cooperate. Let's come in a little bit and notice that because of the width here, this becomes a fairly long flat grind, and that actually gives you a fairly good edge geometry. I have used this for all kinds of cutting tasks and found it performs very, very well. Even though you do have a fairly thick blade stock, that long grind gives you enough distance that the taper can sort of slowly open up any kind of material that you're dealing with, okay? And that makes the slicing capability of this blade much, much better than maybe a blade that had a shorter distance here in this grind. Okay, one of the other cool things about this blade shape is the way the belly kind of finishes here, and you get this little bit of straight edge. What that means is that if you're cutting on a surface and you're cutting down like this, you've got this portion of blade making very, very good contact with whatever work surface you happen to be using. And so this knife performs great for any kind of, you know, cutting on a cutting board or cutting a piece of rope that you've laid down or anything like that where you're working on a surface. This portion of the blade works extremely well. Now, that means it's going to get a lot of use, and so you may have to pay attention to that for sharpening. Now, of course, S30V blade steel is going to hold an edge really, really nicely. The other part of this is the recurve blade. You guys know I like recurves. I've talked about that before, and so it's going to slice extremely well. You can see because of the recurve, it's going to push all of this belly into whatever material you happen to be cutting on. There is this nice cutout for your thumb on the top, and the handle is certainly big enough to use this grip where, you know, your thumb is on the thumb ramp here with the jimping, but I find it very, very natural to grip the knife this way and get into some finer detailed work, especially if you're doing a lot of cutting, okay? So I find that really, really comfortable and really helpful. In terms of just overall design, you've sort of got this very abrupt drop point, so it's a very quick drop, and you've got a nice top swedge here. Now, one of the things that I feel like I should mention is that this would actually make a really good rescue knife. I think I made this point about the 0350, but notice how it's not an extremely acute point. And let's imagine this is, I don't know, somebody's leg and you have to cut their pants off them, or it's their stomach and you've got to, you know, you're trying to do surgery or you're cutting off a seatbelt. Well, you can easily slide this knife along a piece of skin without having any risk at all of that tip penetrating, okay? So I could see this working very well for a police officer or an EMT or a firefighter who may have to cut clothing or cut anything that's close to human flesh without doing any damage. Okay, so I think this is a really, really good blade shape for that. Now, on the other side of that equation, I'm going to say that this is not a great penetrating blade. Look how much material you've got there, and the point is not that acute, okay? It's not a super sharp point. If you're looking for that, I would say you may want to lean more toward the 0560. By the way, there's the 0560 and the 0300 side by side. That'll give you a good sense for size as well. I probably should have done this at that point, but blade shape is where I kind of wanted to talk about it. You can see how the point here is much finer than the point up here. Okay, by the way, both of these are flat ground and extremely useful blade shapes. I really like both of these blade shapes. But as you know, I have just a slight preference for recurves. I do like that a whole lot. So yeah, recurve blade, very, very useful. I found this excels at almost every cutting task that I have, you know, put it through. And although this blade shape is not very conventional, it's quite wide and it sort of looks short and fat, I found it performs better than even other zero tolerances, the 0200 with its recurve. I love that knife, it's one of my favorites. But this blade shape, because of the longer distance here, is able to be a little thinner and it slices a little better than a lot of other very robust bladed knives. Okay, now let's move on to lockup and deployment. Deployment is assisted opening. You've got a flipper and speed assist there, so it does come out fairly quickly. Now, I will say adding a little energy to your finger with your finger helps out. Notice if I just touch it, it still flips out, and it still flips out consistently, but notice the speed. It's not very fast, okay? There's a lot of blade here to move, and so that speed assist is just not going to move it as quickly. Now, compared to the Kershaw Cryo, now that's fast, right? They're both speed assist, but there's a huge difference in how quickly those blades open. This opens really, really fast. This blade is a little slower unless, now here's the thing, you can, if you treat this like a non-assisted flipper and give it a little bit of oomph in your flip, then it comes out really, really fast, okay? I do want to point out, by way of comparison, that this knife is actually a faster opening knife, the 0560, even though it's unassisted. And if you remember from my discussion about assisted versus non-assisted, I said that speed wasn't necessarily faster. I said, yeah, speed was not a reason to go with an assisted knife because they're not necessarily faster or even necessarily easier to get open. But it is assisted. It's just not the quickest assisted opening knife that I've seen. Very, very smooth, very, very comfortable, very consistent. I've never had any issues. And by the way, I have used this. It's winter right now as I'm making this video and it's miserable. And so I've used this a lot with gloves and it performs really well with gloves. Also, it's very, very smooth. Notice if, by the way, speed assist means that that torsion bar doesn't kick in till this point. So all of this, it's not under any spring tension. It's not till you get to this portion that the spring tension kicks in. But now that you know that part, you can see, look how smooth. It is a very, it would be a totally free dropper if there was no torsion bar, okay? Now, having said that, this is not an easy knife to de-assist because there's no detent hole in the blade. There is a detent ball on the frame lock here, on the lock bar, but in order to get that to function, you would have to drill a hole in this S30V blade steel, which is very, very hard steel. And not only are you going to have to drill hard steel, but man, you don't want to mess that up. You've got to get it in just the right place at just the right depth. Detent is not an easy thing to achieve, even for custom knife makers. So for, you know, a DIY project at home, you're really tackling something, okay? Not that you shouldn't try it if you really want to, but just kind of giving you a heads up there. Essentially, this is not a knife that can be de-assisted. I mean, not de-assisted easily, okay? So that's deployment. Very nice, very smooth, not as quick as some others, but fast enough, more than fast enough, especially, by the way, if you put a little effort behind your flip, then it's going to open pretty quick and as quickly as anything else. Lockup is, of course, very good. It's a titanium frame lock, and it's a high-end titanium frame lock, right? Like, the lockup is going to be excellent. And unlike certain zero tolerances, nobody complained about lockup on this. Now, when this guy first came out, there are all these forums and videos and issues with the lockup on this. Not so with the 0300. It was very good right out of the gate. So, and it still is. Now, by the way, I should point out that I think the newest versions of this may have a lock bar insert here, a stainless steel lock bar insert. Just if you get that, it's not a thing that is, you didn't get a fake knife or anything like that. It's something they've recently changed. Let's back off here a little bit. There we go. Maybe not that far. I still want to be able to show you some detail. Okay, all right, so let's keep going. And the lockup here, of course, is titanium frame lock. It does have a lock bar stabilizer. Now, my understanding is that in the newer ones where there's a steel insert, that steel insert has a lock bar stop, okay? So there's no lock bar stabilizer here. All right, lockup then is very good. Deployment is very good, very, very smooth pivot system. Now, as with many frame locks, the washers on this side are much smaller because you can see, look how close, I'll move my finger, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit. I want you to notice, look how close, here's the pivot, okay, and here's the lock bar. See that cut? That cut is the largest you can go with a pivot, with a washer right here. So you can see this washer can't be that big on the lock side because otherwise it would interfere with the functioning of the lock bar. Okay, so smaller pivot on this side, of course, than on this side. By the way, I know the lighting is messed up right now. It should come back here in a second. It's been doing this all day, so I'm not going to wait anymore. The lock bar here, the pivot screw here is a 3/8 hex wrench or hex bolt. Okay, so you're going to want a wrench to throw on there, or a pair of pliers or something like that. In the marketing, they say, this is to allow for easier adjustments in the field, which I guess is true. You're more likely to find a set of wrenches probably than you are a Torx bit. However, if you are a knife guy, and this is, a lot of guys who are buying these are knife guys, you've got tons of Torx bits, okay? You probably have multiple sets. So it's sort of like, okay, there's probably a little bit of hype there. It makes the knife look more overbuilt by putting a bolt on there instead of just a Torx screw. All right. And if you really wanted to make it more easily adjustable in field, you could have gone with just a slot screwdriver, right? That would have been a totally viable option. Anyway, so you just need to know that if you're going to buy this and adjust it, you will need a wrench for that. Let's see. We want to move on to the handle. this handle is one of the things that is most appealing about this blade. Of course, I love the Blackwash titanium. That's one of the reasons that I got this version, but it is 3D machined G10 and titanium, full stainless steel liner on the G10 side. You know, you probably could argue that that's unnecessary, and maybe you'd be right. One more thing. You can get just a little bit of lock stick. Not often. I'd say 1 in every, I don't know, 10 times I use the knife. I'll go to close it and there'll be a little bit of lock stick, but very, very, very little. Okay. Now, carrying on, 3D machined G10 and titanium, super comfortable. I mean, this thing just loves to be in your hand, and even the profile of the back of the handle here just fits right into the palm of your hand perfectly. So really, really comfortable. You can choke up a little bit. You're not going to choke down much because it's not that big of a handle. Even though it's 5 inches, you're losing the first ½ an inch. So it's more like 4.5 inches with a thumb ramp, okay? Reverse grip is very good. It is jimped for your thumb here, and it's going to work well in reverse grip. Although, as I pointed out, the blade shape, in my mind, is not that conducive to combat because of the width of this. It's just not a super pointy blade. For every other kind of combat purpose, for any kind of slashing or, you know, this kind of stuff, sure, it's going to work fine, okay? And by the way, you know, my thinking is any knife that you're carrying, if you are really, really in that much trouble, you're going to use it to get yourself out of that trouble, okay? And so because of that, you know, it's probably not the end all and be all. Unless you're a police officer, unless you're a soldier where you're going in expecting to need your knife in combat, probably combat considerations are not the #1 consideration. You probably need to think more about your EDC uses of a knife when you're thinking what knife to buy and what you're going to use it for, okay, or what kind of purposes you have for it. It is torque spec construction everywhere else. So if you're going to take this knife apart, even though this is a bolt, everything else is torque spec construction. It is a partial back spacer here, so it's kind of open, not too hard to clean out. In fact, you wouldn't even need like forced air or anything. You could just run a cloth in there pretty easily. The pocket clip is very, very good. This is, you know, a pretty Strider-esque pocket clip, and it is extremely good. Now, it's not a real deep carry. You can see there's quite a bit of knife exposed, and one thing you may want to do, one thing I'm certainly thinking about doing, is putting like a low ride clip on this knife. Now, the only consideration there is that means you've got even more knife now in your pocket than currently, okay? Lanyard hole here, you'd be hard pressed to get 550 through there. You could probably do it if you know, tied a piece of something smaller around and pulled it through. You'd probably be okay. All right, so handle is very good, very comfortable. Blade shape is extremely utilitarian. Even though it looks a little different than a lot of folding knife blades, it performs exceptionally well for all of your everyday cutting tasks. And I have used this for a lot of those everyday cutting tasks. All right, very, very good. S30V blade steel is going to perform really well, super good rust resistance, super good edge retention. There's a lot of things that I really like about this knife, and so I think you can kind of pick up on that. By the way, these are stop pins. I don't think I mentioned this during under deployment. I just mentioned the flipper. These are, I mean, they work because of the speed assist, but it's really awkward to get to, just not very practical to use the blade stop as a thumb disc. It works, you know, you can do it, but primarily these are meant to be blade stops, okay? There you go. That's my take on the Zero Tolerance 0 through 300. Absolutely great blade, highly recommended if you're able to deal with that extra weight. Okay, and as you know, I carry a lot of big knives, I carry a lot of heavy knives, so the weight was not the end of the world for me, but it may not be something that you want to deal with. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll talk to you later.